Hello. We present to you the third episode of the documentary series Modi's India Tracing India's Global Footprints. This episode is titled India Unleashed An Economic Perspective. In this episode, we delve into India's economic transformation under PM Modi's leadership. This episode explores four key areas: Modinomics, which examines the economic policies and achievements of the Modi government; Dragons and Tigers, highlighting the economic rivalry between India and China; Economic Statecraft, focusing on India's role in the global economic order and its strategic alliances like Quad; and India's New Dawn, discussing initiatives that are strengthening its economic frontiers. For each segment, our panel of experts provide insights into India's strategic economic maneuvers and its growing influence on the global stage. This episode not only charts the course of India's economic journey, but also showcases how the nation is carving out a niche for itself on the world stage. Truly, India's moment in the sun.
I predict that the 21st century is going to be the Indian century. The dynamism, the energy, everywhere I go here, I meet people who are interested in self-improvement and growth. This country has something special, and it's a democracy.
How would you evaluate the economic performance of India and its international standing during the 10-year tenure of the UPA government from 2004 to 2014?
Yes, well, if you look at what the opposition parties, like especially Congress party, is saying, it will say 10 years of Modi rule, GDP growth has been slower than 10 years of UPA rule, which is correct. But on the other hand, Modi's first term was quite fast growing. Second term, if you had COVID, Ukraine, and one El Nino year, the combination has been very, very adverse circumstances. So the big achievement of Modi is not faster growth. It is the achievement of complete solidity of the Indian economy in the face of very, very fierce global winds. Larry Summers, the American economist, said in 2023, the world is on fire. The combined effect of COVID, Ukraine, and El Nino was such that 70 countries were in desperate trouble and had gone to the IMF for help. India's three neighbors, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all with the IMF.
The annual IMF World Bank meetings when all the world's central bankers and all the world's finance ministers are coming together. We've got a world on fire between high interest rates, strong dollar, climate change, pandemic, fallout from the Ukraine war. And my fear is that we're going to see some working groups formed and some communiques agreed, but we're not actually going to see anything that's going to ease the pain for the tens of millions of people who are suffering from what the historian Adam Tooze has called the polycrisis.
But in India, there is no sense of any fire, no sense of any storm. Appears to be complete stability. I mean, the contrast is remarkable. If you go back 10 years earlier, there was what was called the taper tantrum. The Fed in 2014 was planning to suddenly increase its interest rates. Because of that, there was an enormous outflow of dollars from all emerging markets back to the safe haven of the USA. Within that, it destroyed India. The exchange rate went from 55 to 65 within a few weeks. Mr. Raghuram Rajan was called from America to come and save the economy, and he set up some special fund to try and attract NRI money and tame those winds. So, there was a storm in 2014, and India was regarded as one of the fragile five, and it fell like the other fragile five. 2024, suddenly the same India is completely rock solid, so rock solid that people are not even aware that there is a global problem.
Earlier this week, the International Monetary Fund released its global economic outlook, warning of slowing growth ahead. But there was one bright spot. India, which is set to grow more than 6% this year. That's more than any other major economy. According to the IMF, an increase in Indian domestic investment is key. It also said that growth is set to continue in the years ahead.
So the quality of the improvement is something that has been very impressive. To be growing at 7% in these conditions is extraordinary. To grow at 7% when the UPA was in power was less extraordinary because China had pulled the whole global economy along so much that growing at 7% was not so difficult. But to do so in current circumstances is quite impressive. And so, while India is still a poor country, the world has taken note that here is a country with potential.
Okay. Now, obviously, you seem to be pretty impressed with the way the Modi government has managed the contradictions and the challenges that the global landscape has thrown at the government in the last 10 years. Where do you think this acumen comes from? Because when he became prime minister, the biggest question was, would he be able to, look eye to eye with the world leaders and take India, to new heights? That was the question.
Modi has done an unbelievable job in India. I mean, literally, and I know, the liberal press here, they beat the hell out of him. He's taken 400 million people out of poverty. When we go lecture Modi about, when they want to trade with us, but we lecture literally. I go to these countries soon after a lot of our government officials there. It's like we're fantasizing about, climate and labor and how we think they should be running their country. He has 400 million people without toilets. Really? And we're lecturing them how to do things. They put in this unbelievable, every citizen by hand or by eyeball or by finger is recognized. They open bank accounts for 700 million people. The transfer payments are going through. They've got an unbelievable education system, unbelievable infrastructure. They're lifting up that whole country because this one man is he's tough. But I think you have to be tough to break that down. And he's breaking down some of the bureaucracy. They have, I think it's 29 states or something like that. But they all had completely different, it's almost like Europe, they have completely different tax systems, which leads to enormous corruption. He's breaking all that stuff down.
Modi has surprised many people on many fronts. And the surprises have worked both ways. There are very serious contradictions in what he says. On the one hand, he keeps emphasizing that interdependence is very important. We cannot be isolationist. Then he keeps saying we have something called Atmanirbhar, which looks the opposite of interdependence. It looks like self-sufficiency. He keeps stressing that so much. He keeps talking about this PLI, this attempt to kickstart a large number of 14 sectors. He says special things to revive them. And yet say at the same time, while it appears to be part of Atmanirbhar, that Indian companies will, it appears that the main wooing is to get foreign companies in. Again, the contradictions are very, very. What exactly are you trying to do? And the answer is, he's playing different lobbies. I think he himself is much more of a liberalizer than the party itself. But the RSS is not a liberalizer. The Swadeshi Jagran Manch, You can tell from its name. Swadeshi Jagran Manch means a domestic movement for domestic. So that's an important part. So he is playing off these various lobbies in order to achieve this particular position. He has had an emphasis on governance and on improving digitization and the quality of governance. I think his cleverest thing is he took the best ideas of the Congress party and made them his own. The real result, I mean, if you look at they talk about the JAM unity, about the Jan Dhan Yojana, banking for all, the Aadhaar, the mobile banking, all of these were basically for 10 years nurtured under the UPA. He took all of those and made them even better. In fact, he has left Rahul Gandhi without an agenda. What does Rahul Gandhi claim that he wants to do? Because Modi has taken over his best ideas and done them even better. So these are the various clever ways in which Modi has gone forward. So he has an open mind, enough of an open mind to take over the UPA, the very same policies that he criticized when he was in opposition. He has taken over and made them even better.
Right.
These have been his major strengths. He has been helped by various factors in his first term. He came to power when the price of oil was $115. Within 6 months, the price was down to $45. So his first 5 years, he was very greatly helped by this great improvement in the global scenario. But his second 5 years, he's had to deal with COVID, Ukraine, and El Nino. So these have been very difficult years. So he sailed through the easy years and he has made good progress in the difficult years. And the most important thing, therefore, has been this time. Although you may say average growth rate is slower, but to have got through such difficult conditions in such a manner as he has, the world has taken up and taken notice, and quite rightly so.
India is the world's fastest growing economy. The IMF says it could become the third largest economy by 2027. And this is despite 2 wars, multiple conflicts, and global economic gloom and doom. So the question is, how has India managed to remain the bright spot? How is it defying these trends?
India is doing incredibly well. I have to say that India is the fastest growing of the large economies in the world. If India continues with its reforms, I think India in the coming decade can become a $10 trillion economy.
So is it fair to say then that the UPA government had great ideas, but either because of the coalition politics or lack of imagination, they fell short of implementation, and that's where Modi filled the gap? Is that a fair assessment?
Approximately. They had very serious problems of a series of scams that came up. The second thing is that while the UPA was in power, again, the global thing was good in terms of growth, but agricultural prices absolutely skyrocketed globally between 2008 and 2014. And in India, this resulted in double-digit inflation. So, inflation in the second phase of UPA was extremely high, combined with the scams. So this is what brought them down. So these circumstances, Modi has been lucky, you can say, that global agricultural prices or commodity prices in general have been favorable. So he has faced a helpful climate from that point of view. But as I said, the most important thing has been his ability to spot which were the best ideas of the opposition, take them, and without doubt, his execution has been superior. No doubt about it. So something like Indira Awas Yojana, which is free housing for the poor. Indira Gandhi's idea 30 years ago, but the rate of building has gone up 10 times under Modi. So it actually becomes an impact instead of just being a program. And again, the leakages that used to take place. Rajiv Gandhi, when he was Prime Minister, was famous for making a statement that when you give out 1 rupee to help the poor, 15 paisa gets through and 85 is wasted. Today it's probably the other way around. Today probably 15 paisa is wasted and 85 paisa gets through. So there are still leakages. We are not in nirvana. This is not a perfect society. But there is a huge improvement in execution.
In your view, how has Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy strategy enhanced or redefined India's strategic autonomy on which I talked a lot with Michael Kugelman, the concept of strategic autonomy, especially in the context of its relations with major powers like the United States, China, and Russia.
Wow. What Prime Minister Modi has done is to be able to leverage a lot of the expectations that the world has for India. So from an economic perspective, India has tremendous potential because of its sheer size, because of its investments in technology, its ability to lead when it comes to the certain pharmaceutical industries and the like. So as a consumer, as an innovator, and its geographic location, there's a tremendous opportunity and optimism when it comes to India.
Now another endorsement coming from the side of the Goldman Sachs CEO, who has hailed the India growth story and said that India's market are extremely exciting. He finds India's markets most exciting, and most importantly, he says that India has a big growth opportunity. India's markets are going to be extremely exciting. Remember, this is a time when the world had been reeling in the past few years from the aftermath of the slowdown due to the pandemic, and when we speak of the India growth story, India has been doing rather well.
And what Prime Minister Modi has done is to be able to make good use of that. And so when we look at trade relations that India has been involved in, we see that the world essentially is courting India, that there is a recognition that without India, not just the regional trading system, but indeed the global economy is poorer for it. So there is a great deal of impetus to include India into these trade frameworks and into the global international economic order.
India overtook the UK as the world's 5th biggest economy. Its population is surpassing China, and Goldman Sachs is predicting that India will be the 2nd largest economy by 2075, just behind China. A number of big people have weighed in on the potential of India to become a superpower. Warren Buffett is saying that India is the most exciting country in the world. Bill Gates has said that India is a sleeping giant and waking up now. And Elon Musk has said that India is the future.
When it comes to competitive positioning and rivalry, the established leader won't give way easily, right? You have to fight for your place and take that position. And you can see that competitive rivalry, unfolding, with US and China already. And India expected to be, the 3rd largest economy by 2030 or thereabouts. How do you see the strategic economic positioning of India in relation to US and China?
Unlike China and the US, India has a very young population. The median age was just 28.7 in 2022, far below the US and China, who are at an age of 38. If India can continue to educate its people, improve the operating environment for businesses, and ensure that new wealth being created is being distributed fairly among all of the people who live in the country, then they'll earn their place among the economic superpowers of the 21st century, especially at a time where China's impressive growth story is facing huge problems, from their real estate collapse to their ballooning hidden debts propping up the economy.
We can measure the standing of a country economically through GDP, and we can rank India. Is it going to be number 3? Is it going to be number 4? And that's a source of great pride, and that's also going to be a source of tension. But when we talk about economic prospects, it's also about living standards and what the economy means to your average voter back at home. India has tremendous potential, but at the same time, there is a great deal of income inequality and unequal distribution of wealth as well. There is a great deal of potential to address those challenges. There is a great deal of opportunity to really propel India's domestic economy. If India is able to really leverage the potential that it has so that there is all boats across India actually rise, that sends a tremendous signal about what it means to be a successful country. It's not just about GDP, it is about higher living standards across the board. All of a sudden, if you're seeing more people actually going to India for business opportunities, you're seeing more people going to India to look for employment opportunities, then what is a better way than to demonstrate India's real, lasting economic strength?
Despite some of the underlying issues, India has a very bright future. S&P Global Ratings forecast that India's GDP will reach $7.3 trillion by 2030, surpassing Germany and Japan to become the third largest economy in the world.
And economic allure. We talk about China, right? And China is, yes, the second largest economy. It's showing signs of weakness, but it is still weak. But there is not a lot of migration from the West to go to China to seek new opportunities. Maybe there's obviously going to be business opportunities, but it's not really this whole mass of people going to China to look for new opportunities to work. That is still, and the weakness of the Chinese economy is exactly that it is not seen to provide great opportunities for the largest amount of people. I think the challenge for India is to be able to deliver on that. And when we look, for instance, in the 80s, 90s, we talked about the Asian tigers, right? The Asian tigers, that is to say Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, these countries and governments.
In a season of global economic struggles and uncertainty, 4 exceptional Asian nations emerged as roaring tigers. They defied all odds and rewrote their destinies. Once little countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, started on a transformational journey that would eventually leave the world in awe of their astonishing development. Amidst the past turbulence, these nations confronted challenges that tested their resolve. Yet with visionary leadership and unwavering determination, they set out to reshape their fates. Each tiger's narrative is a compelling account of triumph over hardship. From the booming city of Singapore to the dynamic landscapes of Hong Kong, the technological prowess of South Korea, and the manufacturing brilliance of Taiwan.
What they were successful in doing are a number of issues. One is having successful industrial policy. Having successful, and the United States and other countries would argue, well, it was protectionism too. That is indeed the case, but it was also a strategic investments in key industries that really elevated their economic growth trajectory. India has the potential and is actually doing that kind of strategic industrial investment. We're going to see much more of that coming through. The other part of the Asian tiger success story is that it did lead to higher education, higher incomes, higher standards of living. And that became very aspirational for across the Indo-Pacific region. And I think we still see that. So that's really, to me, the key for India's success moving forward.
Now, you talked about the competitive advantage of the Indian workforce being young, skilled, multilingual, and so on. Now, we also see aging population across the West and even in the Asian countries such as Japan, Taiwan, and of late even in China. So moving forward, these countries, do you think, will be able to overcome the insularity as far as their cultural openness is concerned and embrace foreign labor, such as the Indian workers?
Yeah. So what's interesting is this. I don't want to start with an anecdotal story, but when you go to Japanese universities, it's not uncommon to see Indian students who are studying at Japanese universities. And what happens is that they get educated under the Japanese university system. If they want a job in Japan, essentially they can get any job that they want, because the Japanese companies really do appreciate the fact not only that they have the skills that are required, but also the cultural familiarity and the respect that a lot of Japanese companies and Japanese businesses require from its workers. So those who go from India to Japan, if you're looking for a high-paying job, a highly skilled job, I think going to Japan is actually a really good idea. But here's the question: is Japan, is Korea, is Taiwan prepared to accept workers who may not necessarily be culturally familiar or linguistically fluent in the country of origin, in those respective countries, but nevertheless accept Indian workers, whatever industry they may be in? Right now, the demographic situation is such that really they have no choice. The Japanese, the Koreans, and Taiwanese have no choice but to accept them. But that's not good enough. What they really need to do is to roll out the red carpet, welcome those Indian workers who are going to be very hardworking. They may not necessarily be fluent in that East Asian language, but if they're willing to learn, and most importantly, to understand the business culture and to work within that framework, I believe that the Indian workers have a great deal of potential, and they will certainly be welcomed in those countries. Okay. But they have a lot of choices. I mean, they can go to Australia, they can go to Canada. They're very highly sought after right now. It's a seller's market.
There's so much brain power in India. I mean, it is not like, you're dealing with some very, very, very smart people.
If India were to effectively, be a competitor to China, it has got to bridge that economic gap. So, in what way you think, India can try to wean the world away from China and, for example, iPhone production coming into India and so on. So what are the things that India need to do in order to bridge the economic gap with China?
The economic gap between China and India is so huge, it will not be bridged in my lifetime or my son's lifetime. It is almost 500% of India's per capita. It's that far. So you do not bridge that gap in a few years.
Look at the trade deficit first. It has grown dramatically in the last 5 years and crossed $387 billion.
It's a very long time. It may happen at some point of time, but that is not the kind of scenario we should be worrying about. The whole point is that China, while still only a lower middle income country, had already become globally important. India too also. I mean, we are, according to some data, actually poorer than Bangladesh. Please, let's be clear. Let's be clear that, we are not competing with China. We are not in that league. We are far, far poorer, and we will not get to China's stage for a long time. But just as China had become a power to cope with when its per capita income was no more than $5,000, India too. I mean, you could say, let's get to $5,000, and at that particular point, we can be a global power to reckon with, not a superpower by any means, not a rich country by any means, but we will be competing. Without doubt, we will be far below China, as I said, for a very long time.
You look at India and China, on paper, there is tremendous synergy. And the leaders of both the countries talked about it when they were good friends until the border issue flared up. On paper, it looks that the manufacturing hardware capability of China and the services software capability of India, if they can gel well, they can dominate the world. But it's not really, come to fruition. Why?
Well, if we look at trade agreements, right? So there is a trade agreement between the 10 ASEAN countries and several key Asian countries, which should have included India, but India dropped out at the last minute because it was concerned about being absorbed essentially and not being able to compete with China, and that the Chinese economy, Chinese exports would dominate India. So there is that concern that too much integration with India, it is a natural fit. It can be very complementary. But at the same time, there is a lot of concern, especially in this Modi government, about protecting even some of the weaker industries of India as well.
I'll pick up a point from Dr. Balakrishnan there. Free trade agreements must begin at home. Now, what at home in India made the Prime Minister Narendra Modi reluctant to sign on to the RCEP?
Well, all negotiations in FTAs or any international negotiations are based on a set of domestic interests and national interests. Let me first say that, India understands and believes in the strategic and economic merits of RCEP. Since 2012, we have negotiated in good faith with a great deal of commitment, and a lot of hard work has gone into it. We were particularly concerned, as you can imagine, that our trade deficit with the RCEP countries have gone up from $7 billion in 2004 to about $105 billion in 2018, trade deficit. Now, nearly more than half of it is, of course, with China. So what we were looking for is a set of safeguards that would ensure that there was no dumping. We weren't looking for safeguards to protect our industry, but we were looking for safeguards in a way that would prevent dumping either directly or via other countries.
So there are strengths to the Indian economy. There are strengths to all economies worldwide, but with strengths come weaknesses. And right now, India does want to protect its weak industries as well as its strong ones. And if there is closer economic cooperation or enhanced trade relations where there is a lower tariff barrier or greater market access, then the Indian concern is that it would be overrun essentially by China. So that's where the competition is. The other issue is this. I talked at the beginning about the tremendous respect that the three other Quad countries have for India. I don't think China would have that kind of respect. China's tradition has been very much a feudal system where China is on top and the other countries are more submissive to the Chinese hierarchy. I don't think the Indians are prepared to accept that kind of relationship with China. If India wants to be in a partnership, they want to be the meeting of two equals. That's always going to be a challenge with China. And so even if economically it was a pragmatic thing to do, which I don't think it is, from a political perspective, it would be seen as a sign of weakness on the part of the Indian government.
India has got simmering tension at the border with China, but its trade imbalance is still growing. And so going forward, how can these countries de-risk themselves from China on a longer footing?
Right. Well, the popular approach to this is the China +1 strategy. What does that mean? We're not pulling out of China altogether. We're not even not investing in China anymore. It's just not investing as much, not expecting as much, going into China with their eyes wide open, and also finding that +1, the other country or countries that may be an alternative to China. Now, this is a great opportunity for India because it does become part of that China +1 strategy. I would also argue that India has become its own destination unto itself. So this is the opportunity for India to really shine.
Coming to the most obvious question now, what is China Plus One? China Plus One, or simply Plus One, is a business strategy where companies avoid investing only in China and diversify their business into other countries as well. Simply put, it means multinational firms have started looking beyond China to manufacture their products. Now, who gains from China Plus One? Now, some of the clear winners of China Plus One are European nations, Mexico. MNCs have started investing in emerging countries, and India happens to be one among them due to its low production cost and a favorable business environment. Apple's plans to manufacture iPhone 14 in India has set the ball rolling for the country to promote itself as an attractive manufacturing hub. The move by the American tech company reflects an effort to de-risk the production and supply chain for products that have a high level of dependence on China.
But what we are seeing is a hesitancy to put too many eggs into the China basket. And quite frankly, China has made it a lot easier for countries as well as private companies to make that decision. I know, for instance, Japanese corporate executives are quite wary of going to China right now because they may be able to enter, but there may be problems leaving the country because they may be detained because of whatever economic security concern or charges of espionage or whatever, whether they are true or not. There's a lot of concern on the part of individual executives, which in turn changes the policy of companies. And this is seen not just from Japanese companies, but from other, across the world right now. U.S. companies are facing similar issues. And you see that right now. For instance, there used to be a lot of direct flights from Washington to Beijing. That's really been reduced. The price of going from the United States to China has risen astronomically because it's so costly. Flights to India are increasing. So there's a lot of appetite, which you can actually see from things like flights, the actual people going to India right now. And it's not just the other way, it's both ways, from India to the United States, from India to Asia, from India to the world, but also the other way. The world is going to India right now. And there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of momentum. But again, as I said at the beginning, there are risks and concerns about India too.
Now, with the current superpowers on the decline, it's quite likely that the 21st century is going to be an Asia-centric century, particularly with the rivalry between China and India. What steps you believe India needs to take to bridge the economic gap with China, for instance, in trade imbalance?
So I think India needs to implement several structural reforms, ranging from issues of infrastructure to logistics to tariffs. I think India still remains inherently protectionist despite the conclusion of a string of recent free trade agreements. As I mentioned on the issue of infrastructure and logistics, there has been a significant amount of progress through the Make in India scheme, through Gati Shakti scheme, which aims to improve last mile infrastructure connectivity, and the production linked incentive scheme. But I think there is still a long way to go. I think another issue is improving the quality of its labor. So India isn't labor constrained, but the quality of its labor is a potential constraint. So there's a need for more investment in human capital, focus on skills development, employment generation. There's a challenge of creating, I think, almost 1 million jobs per month, or 200 million jobs over the next decade. So that I think is a significant challenge facing the government. And then perhaps most importantly is the challenge of implementing politically sensitive reforms in areas such as land acquisition and labor reforms. We've seen, for instance, the protests that have taken place both back in 2021 and more recently against attempts to try and implement politically insensitive agricultural reforms by these protests by farmers. So I think these are some of the key bottlenecks or challenges for India to really be able to bridge the economic gap with China.
Okay. Now, I would like to ask you a supplementary question on this because it's, I think, important to compare the trajectory of China's growth in the last 4 decades as well as now India's growth currently. Now, when China started growing in the 1980s, obviously it used infrastructure and manufacturing as a main vehicle of employment growth. But now that India is growing, unfortunately, in the digital economy, one can achieve growth without concurrent increase in job growth. So, how do you think India is going to reconcile with this job creation agenda that it needs to have? If it were to grow, further.
A private research firm that publishes more recent data than official numbers, the jobless rate has been hovering around 7% or 8%, up from around 5% over the last 5 years. And according to the CMIE, the labor force participation rate, which includes persons who are employed or seeking employment, has fallen below 40% from 46% 6 years ago. This chart shows India's youth unemployment is 40%, much higher than the overall rate of 7.7%. Today, however, a confluence of international and domestic factors is giving India a chance to catch up. Internationally, manufacturers are looking to reduce their dependency on China. Domestically, the populist government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants broader prosperity than the cyber economy on its own can provide. Years of investment in highways, railroads, and ports combined with regulatory reforms have reduced, if not eliminated, the obstacles that long kept foreign investors at bay. Investing in human capital can also help address several other challenges facing India, such as the need for a more skilled and productive workforce, and the challenge of creating decent jobs for the growing population. Education and training are critical to the long-term growth and competitiveness of the Indian economy. A well-educated and skilled workforce is essential for attracting investment, promoting innovation, and increasing productivity.
I think that will be a key challenge. I don't think India can emulate the model that China followed, or for that matter, the Japanese, the Koreans, and the other Asian tiger economies did. I think we are in a different world order and a different, the way the global economy functions has changed. So I think it's a more service-based economy, and I think that obviously offers India some potential advantages. Given its strengths in terms of its strong digital ecosystem and IT educated workforce. But as I said, I think that it's not possible to sort of shift from a large agriculture based economy straight into a large service based economy. It will not be able to provide sufficient employment. So there is a need to develop that manufacturing potential and capability, even if it's not possible to emulate the Chinese model or the model by the other Asian tiger economies. That is the only way that one will be able to generate sufficient employment for India's large workforce of over 550 million.
Now, you specialize in trade and economic interests across the Indo-Pacific. Considering the strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region, how do you assess India's role and its initiatives in promoting regional security, stability, and economic cooperation, especially through platforms like the Quad?
Right. So, of course, the Quad was not initially an economic mechanism. It wasn't even a defense strategy. It was really to deal with the immediate natural disaster. And the Quad has since then taken on a different role. And the role that it has now is much more focused on reassessing the regional order and to have strengthening of relations between like-minded countries.
The Quad, officially the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, it's a group of 4 countries: India, the United States, Australia and Japan. This grouping was a concept developed by late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe as he sought unity among 4 democracies that have seen friction with China. China, a country with growing territorial ambitions, has condemned the grouping as a move to encircle it. All 4 Quad members insist a free and open Indo-Pacific is essential. The Quad grouping has repeatedly emphasized that its goal is to maintain the liberal rules-based international order.
many would argue that India is actually the weakest link amongst the four countries. And so that the United States, Australia, and Japan are much more in alignment when it comes to their security and economic interests, and they're prepared also to work more closely together than India. That said, the need to keep India involved are tremendous, and there is great recognition amongst the three other Quad member countries that to not have India in the fold is not an option. And there is this tremendous effort to accommodate a great deal of what India is concerned about, and especially what the Modi government is focused on, and to be able to adapt according to India's current needs.
Now, your expertise also covers Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. India has had close political, economic, and security partnership with these countries. How seriously is India taken by these countries?
I think when we talk about things that are of great concern to these countries, they are Japan, Korea, Taiwan are at the heart of technology, innovation, and also at the heart of technology competition as well. There is an understanding that India has a tremendous role to play as a provider of some of the supply chain resiliency when it comes not just to semiconductors, but also in other IT sectors as well. And again, when we start talking about economic security, it's not simply limited to the information technology sector. It is about healthcare, it is about materials, it is also about workforce. And India has a tremendously educated workforce, a very ambitious workforce as well. And there is a great deal of appetite on the part of Japan, on Korea, and Taiwan to tap into that market and the dynamism and the ability of the Indian workforce to be more integrated and to seek new opportunities outside of its own borders as well. I do want to say there is tremendous respect for India, both at the national level and also at the grassroots level. When we look, for instance, at Japan, Japan really was the initiator of this idea of an Indo-Pacific, the confluence of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Where did he launch that? He launched it before the Indian Parliament during his first administration.
Mr. Abe was the reason why we have the Quad today. He birthed the grouping. He was its consistent champion through the years. I'm sure you recall that in 2007, it was at his address to the Indian Parliament, where he spoke of the confluence of the two seas, and a phrase which he remarked that he had taken from the title of a book written in 1655 by Mughal Prince Dara Shikoh. And that's the speech in which he called upon India, Japan, Australia, and United States to be the diamond, which would then sort of, preserve the maritime commons in the Pacific and the Indian Oceans.
That has really become not just a concept that Japan has embraced as its de facto grand strategy, but it has become an adopted idea of the United States, of European countries, as well as across the region as well. The fact that it's called Indo-Pacific, I am aware that there is a lot of concern in India that it does, is it really an Indo-Pacific strategy when India is a bit ambivalent about its own role. But from the outside, looking at the Indo-Pacific strategy, we know by its name alone that India has this critical role to play, and we cannot afford to alienate or to not work closely together with India.
Now, China's Belt and Road Initiative is now 10 years old. And the other countries, for example, there is now India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. How does that stack against the China's Belt and Road Initiative? Because these initiatives have big impact on the neighboring countries, particularly in the South Asian region, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, you name it. So they not only have economic implications, but also political and security implications. So going forward, how do you see this India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor?
At the sidelines of the G20 summit, global leaders announced a historic economic trade route. This trade route will link Europe and the Middle East and India together.
आने वाले समय में यह भारत, पश्चिम एशिया और यूरोप के बीच इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन का प्रभावी माध्यम होगा.
With a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster.
The Indian-Middle East-Europe corridor, or the IMEC, will connect the East Indian corridor to the Gulf region, and the Northern corridor will connect the Gulf region to Europe.
It will be the most direct connection to date between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe.
We know that China has been trying to get the maritime Silk Route functional again. China's BRI initiative has led to many countries falling in debt.
Also, importantly, this corridor is clearly being viewed as a way to counter China's pet project, China's Belt and Road initiative that we have heard so much about, and that is potentially causing a lot of problems. Now this, of course, China's BRI is a huge infrastructure project, but it has raised concerns over that country's growing influence and, quite frankly, that country's predatory presence across 3 continents. The BRI has led to indebtedness in country after country, and they've been looking for solutions and answers and possible alternatives, and this new route could potentially provide that.
I think it provides an opportunity to think about de-risking from China in a nutshell. That we have this system in place where there is an assumption that China has to be part of supply chain resilience, that it has to be an integral part when we talk about overseas investments and opportunities. China is going to be part of that. What I'm excited about is that there is a global effort to reimagine more broadly the economic order and to hedge against China leveraging its economic might. So we have a great deal of discussion about economic statecraft. China has been quite good at leveraging its economic might for political purposes. And that has come through things, positive, like the Belt and Road Initiative, but it can also be negative in the form of economic coercive action. Whether it's carrots or sticks, positive or negative, we do know that China is very willing to use economic statecraft. And to mitigate from that risk, countries like India need to find partners and to be able to look towards other, not just neighboring countries, but other regions where it can actually be able to hedge against the Chinese economic statecraft efforts.
So IMEC depends on a peaceful Middle East, on the normalization of ties between Israel and the Gulf countries, especially Israel and Saudi Arabia, which seemed possible until deadly attacks took place in Israel on 7th of October last year. And there were many countries that were very unhappy with this initiative. India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, Iran, Turkey, and China obviously would not want India, Saudi Arabia, Israel to build an alternative trade route to Europe. Even before the Hamas attack, the Turkish President Erdogan and official Chinese media had criticized this initiative, this India, Middle East Economic Corridor. And conflicts, if you look at, India's attempts to establish corridors, whether with Bangladesh or with India, Myanmar, Thailand highway, they've all been stalled. Mainly because of the outbreak of conflict. And now the Hamas conflict has also put a question mark on the IMEC's future. As regards Belt and Roads, I would say President Xi's friend, Russia's Putin, has done more damage to BRI, Xi's dream project, than anything China's rivals could do in America, Japan, and India. The Ukraine war has effectively blocked progress on economic belt railroad projects through Eurasia.
Okay. Let's stick to Middle East just for a little while, because that's one of your specialist areas. How do you see India's recent initiatives on India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor against China's decade-old Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, this corridor is a significant strategic move, no doubt about that. It enhanced, for example, if we look at it from the India perspective, it enhanced India's connectivity with key regions like the Middle East and Europe, and strengthening its geopolitical position. These moves, if we look at it, allows India to be more active in shaping regional economic dynamic and infrastructure development, effectively countering China's dominance in those regions as well. As we know, China is very eagerly investing money in these areas. And crucially, this move is not a standalone action, but a part of what we call India's broader Indo-Pacific strategy. This strategy aims to promote connectivity, economic growth, and stability in the region. And by investing in infrastructure projects that connects the Indian Ocean with Europe through the Middle East, India can bolster its influence and effectively counterbalance China's assertive actions in the region. I believe that this also corridor, if you look at it, it allows India to compete with China and to gain leverage when it comes to the South Asian countries, South Asian influence, I would say. By offering alternative infrastructure development initiative, India can challenge China monopoly over infrastructure projects in the region in South Asia and provide South Asian countries with more options for economic cooperation.
Finally, whoever comes to power after the 2024 elections, what do you think that government should be doing going forward, particularly in the turbulent international waters?
Your biggest problem is our domestic agenda. The 3 E's: education, employment, environment. These are your biggest problem areas. Your education, your school education is pathetic. There's no teaching. There is a tiny upper class of the IITs and so on, which is world class. And beneath that very impressive upper class, we are totally hollow and worm-ridden underneath. So something desperately needs to be done on improving your school education. Second, as I said, is employment. Yes, in some sense, your employment data are improving a little recently. But the fact of the matter is that decent jobs that people want are just not available. In the city of Amroha, 16,000 jobs for the sweeper were announced. And they had 25,000 applications from people including PhDs. The railway is wanting to have, I think, 200,000 people. They had 25 million applications. There are entire cities like Kota, which have set up coaching centers to try and get to government service. So, and they say there are no good jobs available. During elections, I travel in Uttar Pradesh. The word naukri or job is equated with government job. Because they say private sector is not creating jobs.
In the world's most populous country, tens of thousands of graduates and postgraduates spend years at tutoring centers, hoping to crack the fiercely competitive exam. The chances are slim. Less than 0.25% make the grade. But the dearth of well-paying jobs drives them to try. Nearly half of India's 1.4 billion people are under 25. More young people from rural areas like Bhardwaj and Singh are getting college degrees, hoping to move into cities as the economy grows briskly. But the formal sector, meaning businesses registered with the government, accounts for just 8% of total employment. Although the government is wooing global manufacturers to generate more jobs, opportunities are not keeping pace with demand.
So, and the worst thing is this, I said, "Doctor, do you have a job?" He says, we can't afford it. Nowhere else in the world when you hear that, I can't afford a job, what does it mean? It means you have to give a bribe to get a government job. So if you have enough money, you get the government job, otherwise you don't get. So employment is a terrific problem. Environment. Sir, India now has 6 of the 10 most polluted cities in the world. You coming to Delhi, it's like breathing in smoke and fog. It's terrible. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
A list of 100 cities with the worst air pollution was prepared. Of all these names, 99 cities with the worst air pollution on Earth are in one continent, Asia, and 83 of them are in one country, India. Which is the most polluted city in the world? Begusarai in the state of Bihar. It is home to 500,000 people. And air pollution that is 23 times the WHO guideline. Followed by Guwahati in Assam and the capital city of New Delhi.
Our aquifers, by overpumping in Punjab, Haryana, we are destroying all our aquifers, and yet nobody dares stop free electricity. So you're destroying your dirty water continues to be the biggest single cause of death, rivaled with dirty air. And you can say all of the Memami, Ganga and all that stuff at the end of it all. Please do not drink water of the Ganga thinking it is Amrit. You are more likely to die. Maybe that is one way of getting to heaven quickly, but it's not the favored way for me. So these are very, very serious problems that the government should be focusing on, these 3.
Okay. Now, in any country's effort to improve its international standing and stature, its economy plays a very important role. The better your economy, the better your international standing, and the more countries will listen to you. Now, India currently ranks as the 5th largest economy globally, with Prime Minister Modi aiming to elevate it to the 3rd position in the next 5 years and achieve developed nation status by 2047. So what is your assessment of India's progress versus its potential as a global economic powerhouse in both the past decade as well as the decade ahead?
When I first visited the US as a Prime Minister, India was the 10th largest economy in the world. 10th. Today, India is the 5th largest economy. And India will be the 3rd largest economy soon.
So as you mentioned, India currently ranks as the world's 5th largest economy. It's on course to be the 3rd by the end of this decade. And this is up from the 10th largest economy when the Modi government assumed power back in 2014. I think part of this is a result of a slowdown in other major economies. So for instance, as the shrinking Hong Kong stock market has led the Indian stock market to surpass Hong Kong as the world's 4th largest equity market. Similarly, India surpassed the UK as the world's 5th largest economy at a time when the UK is experiencing low growth and it entered recession. But at the same time, I think the government has implemented several policies to make India a more attractive investment destination. So to its credit, the Modi government has come to recognize that the earlier view that India could somehow skip the manufacturing revolution and go straight from an agriculture to service-based economy was not sustainable. So I think India's famed IT sector only employs about 5.5 million people. So that's a very small proportion of the overall workforce. And this has prompted the government to introduce several policies such as Make in India, production-linked incentives, which incentivizes investment in strategically important sectors. So I think that the country is on the right track, but it still has a long way to go. As mentioned, manufacturing is still stuck at about 14% of GDP.
Well, he has a vision for India. He's looking at the long term. And he's already said that by 2047, we will be a developed country. And he started attacking some of the basic problems that India faced, not at the elite level, at the business level, but at the level of the ordinary citizen. And all the schemes that are there about Swachh Bharat and building toilets and insurance and health schemes and bringing electricity to the villages, bringing even 5G now to every corner of India, and this digitalizing the economy, and then trying to make ourselves self-reliant with Atmanirbharta, not only in manufacturing, non-defense manufacturing, but even in defense manufacturing. All this has he's put India on the map as never before, and the fact that we are now the most populous country in the world with a huge talent pool, with the rest of the developed countries aging very badly. So our trained, skilled population has become a public good. And with this will then increase our outreach to various corners of the world. That is also an asset that we have. And the whole Modi's focus on startups and this and that, because they are the incubators of new technologies, bringing the private sector into space, bringing the private sector into defense in a big way. These are the things which are noted, and making, ease of doing business, those steps that he has taken, and the fact that we are receiving a huge amount of FDI. We have weathered the post-COVID and the post-Ukraine conflict as an economy very well. We are supposed to be in a sweet spot, and we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. All this goes to the credit of the leadership of Prime Minister Modi and the team he has built around him, yes.
There's talk of slowdown in 2024, maybe even a recession. But amid this gloom, there is a bright spot, and that's India. And we are not the ones saying this. The IMF is, the International Monetary Fund. They've released the annual assessment of India's economic performance, sort of like a report card. And three things stand out here, three big headlines. Number one, the IMF has called India a star performer, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Number two, India's GDP will grow by 6.3%. That's the current financial year. 6.3% growth. And number three, India will make up 16% of global economic growth. Together with China, it will be the engine of the world economy.